Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Shifting Mental Models to Advance Systems Change. On behalf of FSG and New Profit, I am Jennifer Splansky-Juster, Executive Director of the Collective Impact Forum, a partnership between FSG and the Aspen Institute. We are so delighted to have you here with us today. Thank you for joining us. This session follows a webinar that FSG, the Collective Impact Forum, and New Profit co-hosted earlier this year about systems change. That webinar was based on the article by John Kania, Mark Kramer, and Peter Senge called The Water of Systems Change. That session was really well received by all of those who joined us. And so we've been able to pull together this session as a follow-up on one of the topics that many folks had questions about, mental models. What are they, and what does it really mean to shift mental models? We're really looking forward to addressing this and many more topics with you today. So before we dive into our conversation, I just want to spend a minute or two orienting you to today's session. Today, our webinar will run for about 60 minutes. We'll spend the first part of our time together in discussion with today's guests, and we'll leave ample time for Q&A at the end. You can put your questions in the chat box, or the Q&A box, on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. As they come in, we will sort through them and really try to focus on as many as we can after we hear from our presenters. In addition, please note that today's session is being recorded, and we'll make a link to that recording available to all of you after the webinar. One more thing, just a note about handouts. You can find a copy of today's presentation on the right-hand side of your screen in the handout section. We also do have a link to the article I referenced, The Water of Systems Change, as well as the presentation. So you can get those now or at any time during today's presentation. All right, let's go on to the next slide. So as I mentioned, just to reiterate, we welcome questions. You can put those in the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. If you'd like to engage virtually in the conversation, feel free to tweet. You can do #SystemsChange, and then we have a couple other handles here as well to track the thread of this conversation. Finally, we have our colleague Tracy standing by for any technical questions, so you can put those in the question box as well, and then we will get back to you. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. So I am just thrilled to welcome a number of different guests who will be joining us in today's conversation. First, we have Tammy Heinz, who serves as Program Officer and Consumer and Family Liaison for the Hogg Foundation for Mental Health. She brings a perspective of consumers, youth, and family members into the Foundation's grant making, into their operations and their decision-making processes. Joining Tammy, we have Hayling Price, who is a project team leader at FSG. Hayling has experience in strategy consulting, research, and advocacy in the social sector. In addition to his consulting work, Hayling serves as FSG's Equity Partnerships Lead, advancing the firm's commitment to social equity through strategic collaboration. We are also delighted to have Daryl Scott with us today. Daryl is the co-founder and executive director of PushBlack, the nation's largest nonprofit media platform for African Americans. PushBlack attracts and builds relationships with Black voters through daily Black history and news services that are delivered through mobile messaging. We also have today with us Dr. Julie Sweetland, a sociologist who studies how small differences in language make a big difference in the world. She is a senior advisor at the Frameworks Institute. Frameworks is an essential partner to the mission-driven sector's efforts to change the conversation on social and scientific issues. And last but not least, we have Rick Ybarra, who serves as Program Officer at the Hogg Foundation for Mental Health and leads the Foundation's Integrated Healthcare Initiative and co-leads the Collaborative Approaches to Well-Being in Rural Communities initiative. That initiative is focused on shifting from a primary focus on individual mental illness to the upstream or root causes of poor mental health at the community and systems level. So with that, it is my absolute pleasure to hand it over to Hayling Price. Thank you, Hayling.
Thanks, Jennifer. Great to be with you all today. Want to provide a bit of context for today's conversation before we turn it over to the panelists. Really excited about the perspectives we'll have on the line today. So a few months back, we kicked off our webinar series with a conversation about sort of systems change more broadly. And it's a term that's gotten a lot of excitement in the social sector. In a lot of ways, FSG is in the process of reorganizing our consulting practice around these principles. And we seek to add some discipline, some rigor around some terms that frankly have a lot of buzz, but maybe not a lot of teeth to folks on the ground. So across the space, we think it's important that we align on language and intent when we talk about systems change, and want to provide a bit more context for what we really mean by that, and then a few really inspiring, interesting examples of how that's manifesting in the field. So we advance to the next slide. We can share a bit about kind of definitions and then get into how we might organize this as a sort of principle going forward. And then we'll have Daryl share some perspectives from PushBlack's perspective. So systems change, just in terms of our baseline definition, our shared understanding of the work. We're looking at shifting the conditions that are holding a problem in place. So broadly applicable across a lot of the intractable social challenges we seek to address. My focus here at FSG is mostly on education and youth development, so early childhood, K-12, higher ed access. We do some post-secondary work as well, but really thinking about what is it that's preventing our young people from fulfilling their potential, from self-actualizing and really capitalizing on the great opportunities that exist around the country. Are they experiencing systems differently as a function of their identity? Are there sort of persistent barriers in the community-based sense, in a place-based way that we can help dislodge? But as we size up this challenge, we realize it's not just about getting more young people to beat the odds, but we want to change the odds and make sure that the conditions that they're operating in shift so that we can enable more opportunity. So this is a principle that applies to a number of impact areas. Here at FSU, we also focus a lot on public health, increasingly environmental work, a number of other sort of areas, civic engagement, where we can think about how to shift those conditions. And today we're going to take a deeper dive into a few avenues where we see some promising progress. And with that, I'm going to advance us to the next slide and looking at what we call the six conditions of systems change. So as we think about shifting the conditions that hold the challenge in place, there are a few places we can go. And as Jennifer mentioned, we published now last year a great resource that I'd recommend checking out if you haven't already, The Water of Systems Change. So if we move to this first layer, we're thinking about kind of a spectrum of really how easy it is to identify some of these conditions. Some are more explicit than others, and there's kind of an inverse relationship between the structural and the transformative. So the deeper you go in this pyramid, the higher leverage we find the opportunities. So we're going to make our way down to mental models, which is why we're here today. But just as a refresher, I want to provide folks with a bit of context for how we think about mental models vis-a-vis these other levers for systems change. So for starters, we're looking at policies, practices, and resource flows, and these are, again, the easiest to identify in a lot of ways. They're often measurable, very explicit. So policies, those could be public policies, regulations, and legislation that's on the books. It might also be the formal kind of policies that guide an organization or an institution's kind of plan of action and kind of what governs you as an institution. Practices are often how those policies are implemented. So even the best laid plans, the best intended policies will fall flat if they're not implemented with fidelity. And what we mean is sort of standard operating procedure is often how we're thinking about practice. Then we get into resource flows. So to what extent do we have access to capital or folks, sort of human resources who can carry the work forward? Who's getting funded and why? So unpacking kind of how resources are mobilized to do the work is critical here. The semi-explicit layer gets into relationships and connections and power dynamics. So this is less explicit, but really critical for the work, kind of maybe intangible at times, but we feel like it really does make a material difference on our work to accelerate social change. So if you look at relationships and connections, it's really about what we might call like sort of the social field, or the kind of dynamic you have between folks in this space working together. So in the community setting, you might think about several organizations that serve the same population. Are they coordinated? Are they having conversations? Is it more of a perfunctory meeting where they're sort of checking a box and getting together monthly, but not really informing practice together? So as we think about relationship connections, it's not just sort of knowing someone, having them in your Rolodex, having them in your LinkedIn, but actually the capacity to have more generative conversations and really co-create a future together. So we see that as an essential condition for the work. And then power dynamics, this often goes unspoken, but it's critical. How do we think about those power brokers, those folks behind the scenes who are often driving conversations as it relates to social change. So who is getting funded and why? Is it that they're sort of a pet favorite project of a funder? Is it that perhaps someone on their board is politically connected? So as we think about power dynamics in our sort of social change work, we have to recognize that although we're all ostensibly in this work together, some folks might have a leg up or might be dealing with sort of histories of oppression and marginalization. So this is often where the equity conversation comes into as it relates to race, gender identity, disability sort of status, economic status. So power dynamics is a rich conversation. We won't be diving too deep into this piece today, but I think it has implications for a lot of what we'll be diving into, which is around mental models. So that is this most transformative point, we think, as it relates to systems change. So that is really about the worldview, the deeply held assumptions and beliefs you carry into the work. And we'll be sort of defining this in different ways as we proceed. But I think what's really important to remember here is that mental models undergird these other conditions. So the relationships we have, the power dynamics that exist are functions of sort of the assumptions we might bring into the work. Likewise, the policies, practices, and resource flows that kind of govern how the sector operates, how all sectors operate really, are a function of the mental models of folks who are constructing these systems. So it's important to remember these weren't sort of structures that were handed to us by nature, but very much sort of products of human endeavor and ones that are sort of shaped and influenced by mental models. So as we unpack the work together, we want to think about how important that is. And to double click on this mental models piece, to understand this idea of interior conditions, there's a great quote we share often from Bill O'Brien, and the quote is that the success of an intervention really depends on the interior conditions of the intervener. And what we mean by that is that as you're entering a system, whether it's sort of community, an organization, a national conversation, it's important to interrogate what you bring into that space, what priors you have, what sort of deeply held beliefs or assumptions might drive your work, and likewise, how your collaborators, your interlocutors, your co-conspirators are kind of carrying their own beliefs into the conversation. So to mobilize effectively, it's important to be aware of your own mental models and your interior conditions and do the work and hold a deeply reflective practice that can inform action and also kind of put that in dialogue with others. So that's how we think about mental models and a bit more on kind of the definition, but would love to hear about how that's manifesting with PushBlack's work. So it's a special privilege as a facilitator to hand this over to Daryl. Daryl's also a dear personal friend, and it's been really exciting to watch your work unfold over the past few years. And I'm really excited to be able to share the platform with you today, Daryl.
Thank you, Hayling. Hello, everyone.
All right.
My name is Daryl Scott, and I am the co-founder and director of PushBlack. We are the nation's largest nonprofit media platform for Black people. Now, we attract and engage our subscribers through our Black History service that is based on Facebook Messenger. So lots of folks have Facebook Messenger on their phones. If you do, go ahead and take your phone out. And if you could find the Facebook Messenger app, which is separate from the Facebook app. So Facebook Messenger is the second most downloaded app on people's phones. Go ahead and download it. Or if you already have it, open it up and go to the search section and type in PushBlack, PushBlack. And you can press the Get Started button. You'll get a chance to get stories from me. So you can really see what it's like to be in the PushBlack family. PushBlack has rapidly grown the largest Black digital subscriber list in the country with 4 million mobile messaging subscribers. And that's with a mix of folks that are on both Facebook Messenger and our SMS list. We build deep daily relationships with Black Americans through their phones in order to transform Black civic engagement. 2/3 of Americans spend the majority of their waking hours browsing, texting, calling, emailing, tweeting, Instagramming on their phones. So we decided that we would meet people where they are and we meet our people where they are. Black folks over-index on using Facebook Messenger as a way to communicate with folks. So again, we want to meet people where they are. For PushBlack, we have 3 different tiers of work. So we educate subscribers through Black history and culture. We run really large get out the vote programs, and we really believe in raising Black voices on criminal justice advocacy. So I'll go through each of those and kind of show you how they're connected to FSG's conditions of systems change. So we'll start with educated subscribers on Black history and culture. Having regular, trusted conversations with our subscribers is the crux of our relationship with them. Though our content is steeped in Black history, we cover topics ranging from current events to health and wellness, to saving money, to fighting for social change. This gets at the worldview that we're really trying to impact through our daily stories. This is the mental models piece of FSG's 6 Conditions of Social Change. We are truly trying to change people's minds by educating them. Nothing is new under the sun. Every new thing that's happening in politics today, we feel like we can connect it back to Black history. So we're all about educating our subscribers. Number 2, we ran the largest Get Out the Vote campaign on social media in history in 2018. We've been able to drive massive Get Out the Vote campaigns that have proven highly effective through multiple randomized controlled trials. In 2018, about 500,000 of our subscribers reached a fourth of all Black voters across the country with a personalized voter engagement message. So we sent a message to our subscribers saying, hey, are you voting? And if they said yes, we said, cool, that's great. But the most important thing that you could do is share with your friends. So we've had our subscribers sharing lots of messages around social change and voter work with their friends, and that allowed us to have a huge campaign. This aligns with the relationships and connections component of FSG's 6 Conditions of Systems Change. And we were also, if you think about it, able to kind of flip power dynamics on their head, where we can put the power of the ballot truly in the hands of the people, and we didn't have to go through others to make that happen. Thirdly, we raised Black voices for criminal justice advocacy, from delivering hundreds of thousands of signatures to city halls to demand justice for families of Black people who are calling upon elected officials to make a difference in their lives when we've been slain by the police, to calling elected officials to grant clemency to innocent Black folks. We are always giving our subscribers tools to make a difference on the local level. This aligns with the structural change component of FSG's 6 Conditions of Social Change. We're asked to talk about what's worked well in terms of thinking about mental models. And for us, it all comes down to not assuming that we know it all. We don't go with our gut at all on things. What we do is that we aggressively track our subscribers' engagement with our content. So we're looking at how often they open certain types of stories, how often they click on those stories, how often they share those stories. The 2 things that drive us are lots of pre-testing. Before any story or message or frame goes out to all of our audience, we test it with a small subset of our audience, and we only send the best performing content and the best performing messages to our broader audience. Number 2, we spend a lot of time listening and talking with our subscribers. We do a ton of surveys. We're always doing phone calls. We're always replying. So as you see, we're aggressively seeking for Black folks to be heard and seen. And as long as we keep growing our audience, we'll want to drive impact by listening to our folks and only putting out content that makes sense. Because for us, the best way to drive voter impact, the best way to drive advocacy impact is to first start with a true trusted media relationship. And that's where we begin. We begin with the Black history. That's how we attract folks. And then we're able to use that and leverage it to get our subscribers to take action in the future. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Daryl. We're going to open things up and pass it along to Julie next, and then we'll be moving back to Rick and the folks at the Hogg Foundation. Wanted to start with a conversation about kind of the broad framework, get into a vignette, a quick story about kind of how it's manifesting, and then go a little deeper on the mental models piece per se. So let's spend some time with Julie from the Frameworks Institute now to talk more about kind of what we really mean by mental models and add some foundational background. So Julie, thanks in advance for sort of unpacking this for us.
Great. Thanks, Hayling. And Daryl, I think that's a great example of how thinking about mental models fits into all of these different conditions for systems change. So speaking from Framework's perspective, we've worked for 20 years on understanding mental models on different social issues. We're a group of social scientists, so we tend to use the terminology here, cultural models, which is a closely related concept from anthropology. The research we do helps us think about and understand the cultural models that people hold on any given social issue. So to define these, they're cognitive shortcuts that are created just by living in a culture, right? Through years of experience and expectation. They tend to be automatic. They're one of the brain's tricks and features for thinking fast and making quick sense of a lot of stimuli that come our way all day, every day. And so they're automatic, and they can be implicit, meaning people might not realize that they hold these. Sometimes people are conscious of them, at other times they aren't. We believe at Frameworks and working with different nonprofit organizations, coalitions, and movements to navigate public discourse and really build new ways of thinking on social issues. We believe that understanding these mental models or cultural models can give you a strategic advantage in understanding what are the ways of thinking that are holding a problem in place. So I'm going to give you an example of one quick method that we can use to illustrate a mental model, although our own research is based on long-form, in-depth individual interviews where we look at common patterns in thinking. But let's look at an easier way to demonstrate a mental model so you can know them when you see them. Next slide. All right, so we have here, this is the first 20 or so images that come up if you put in the word ocean into Google Images. So again, that's not how we do our research, but it gives us a quick example of how consistent, right, a mental model is. No one planned this result. It comes up because these are our cultural top-of-mind associations. These are the things that people most frequently, right, associate with an image of the ocean. That's why it's built into the kind of Google algorithm that way. And we notice here, right, the first thing that catches your eye is, wow, a lot of blue, a lot of green. Our own careful anthropological research shows that one mental model that Americans hold about the ocean is that it's a beautiful blue expanse. Why does that matter? Well, that understanding of the ocean holds some social implications for people's policy thinking. So first of all, if it's so big, then people tend to think it's invincible and not highly vulnerable or affected by human endeavors. The other thing is they think of it as water, a crystal clear, beautiful surface. And if people are thinking about the surface, they're less focused on what's underneath, right? Thinking of the ocean as an ecosystem, as filled with life, as critical, right, to the systems that sustain life on land, such as producing oxygen or absorbing heat or driving weather. So that's a mental model that focuses people on some aspects of what of an issue or a topic or concept, and it backgrounds other issues or aspects of that topic. So it's not that it's inaccurate that water, is in the ocean or that it tends to be blue. Those things are true, but they are partial, and that's what makes it a model, right? It's a representation, a partial representation of the whole. I'll show you one more. Go to the next slide, please. Here is the same thing. If you put in teenager, you get rebellion. And so you can see here that this is one mental model that people hold of young people, particularly of adolescents or teenagers. They believe that this is a period that's characterized by taking risks and defying, right, expectations of adults of them. And again, it's not that that's completely untrue, but it's also not a complete picture. And so when people are thinking about teenagers or young people as rebellious and defiant, they are reasoning from that model, and they are less likely to understand and appreciate the importance of early experiences on how teenage social and emotional relationships play out. They're less likely to be thinking about how the environment in our schools or our neighborhoods is affecting young people's experiences, and they're less likely to understand that this is a period of both risk and opportunity, right? That young people in this stage of life are highly sensitive to all sorts of influences. That means the more positive influences we put around them and in front of them, the better outcomes they'll have. So again, this model shapes people's understanding of a social issue and their policy preferences. So I've selected just two here from an environmental issue and a social issue. I just want to say that Frameworks has conducted careful research on the cultural models or mental models of dozens of social issues, and we share that, make those reports widely available, freely available on our website. So please feel free to take a look. They tend to be titled under Map the Gaps. But again, we spend some time understanding the mental models because, as she has put it, it really is critical to understand that social and cultural landscape to create, to really drive meaningful and lasting change. So on the next slide, I've got 3 models that we've seen show up across all kinds of issues, from ocean acidification to environmental health to substance abuse to nuclear risk, right? A big, wide range. So these are what we call foundational mental models that we see in American society in particular, although we see aspects of these nationally or internationally and worldwide. So the first, and this is really the foundational American mental model, is the idea of individualism. So I've got a picture right there of that nice boot with its boot straps that you could grab. This is the assumption that problems, social problems, actually are caused at the individual level, but the solution to them is at the level of personal choice or behavior, those bootstraps that you can pull up and solve your own problem, but also that the consequences of social problems really are at the personal level. So for instance, in our work on substance use and abuse and prevention, people think of the consequences of that problem as severe, but severe for the people experiencing the problem, not socially, right, collectively impactful. And so that individualism model has a lot in it. That model we see as getting in the way of good policy and practice on a wide range of social issues. So being aware of that, attentive to it, and thinking about how to navigate it is really important, and I'll get some tips and strategies for doing that momentarily. Another social model that we see play out across social issues, we see this on issues of aging, on issues certainly of race, equity, immigration, really any social policy issue, but also environmental issues, humans versus critters and creatures, right, and plants, jobs versus the economy. Environment versus the economy. Is an us versus them kind of model. So assumption that another social group or another category of experience is distinct, kind of hermetically sealed, different, right? These two things are opposites or binaries or very, very different. And that difference is to some extent a deficit, right? That the other group, the them, whoever it may be in a particular social dynamic or issue, is problematic in some way for the us. And then finally, a model of fatalism. It is what it is. The problem is so big, so dire, or the players are so incompetent or self-interested, right, that this issue cannot be fixed, and efforts to do so are foolhardy at best, naive and destined to fail. So these are 3 mental models that we see are consistently across issues, barriers to productive conversations on social issues. In addition to these 3 foundational models, you're likely to find and understand and probably noticed already mental models that are much more particular to an issue, but these are cut across. So people working on the issue tend to understand that they're up against some difficult mental models, that people's thinking, their mindsets are not hospitable to the changes, and people in issues know that, and they try to change them. We have seen in social science, but also in our partnerships with coalitions, ways that don't work to engage, to change, to shift mental models. So I'm going to dig into a couple of those before offering some ideas about what to do. So next slide is one thing that doesn't work is correcting their mistakes. We've seen lots and lots of folks either use literally myth fact sheets like this one here on the screen from the Centers for Disease Control, or just to structure their communications as if they are myth busting, right? We know people think these things, and we're going to tell you, don't think that, instead think this. Because that's such a prevalent way of communicating on social issues and trying to correct or push back against unproductive mental models, lots of people use these myth fact sheets, and researchers have studied them. And they found that these are actually backfire. They have the opposite effect. So when people are given these kinds of, a study gave people this flyer here, let them hold it as long as they wanted, read it carefully, take it away, give them a quiz on the information. They found that people misremembered the myths as true. It got worse over time. They followed up with them, next Friday or something, and found that the level of misperception had increased. And then finally, and most terrifyingly for those of us that slap our logos on these sorts of things, people attributed the false information to the CDC. They thought they're a trusted messenger. This is folks that we believe. And they said, no, I read this thing from the CDC. The flu shot can cause the flu. Now, why is this? It's not because people can't read or are willfully stupid or that we're in a post-truth era necessarily. It's about how mental models work. So a mental model, a myth is there, or a mental model is there precisely because we have heard it so many times. It has a cognitive reality. There's a neural circuit up there that holds that idea. And when you restate an unproductive mental model or restate the myth, you have activated that mental model and given that little circuit a repetition. You have reinforced it by restating it. So one thing to think about in shifting the mental model, when you know there's an unproductive understanding out there, is never remind people of something you wish that they would forget. Next slide. Next thing that isn't effective in shifting mental models is assuming that only data, that more and more data, more and more facts will shift people's thinking. You should use data. You should, be very evidence-based in your communications and in the policies you're trying to advise. Of course, we're not against facts in any way, but assuming that people's mental models are there as if they are stacking up facts on either side of a way to understand something, and that just adding more data will somehow tip the balance to a more productive mental model, again, is a flawed understanding of how mental models work. Once they're there, they will be there. Your best guess, your best chance, right, is to kind of build up a new understanding rather than trying to argue your way out of an existing understanding or prove that it's untrue or flawed. So just data doesn't work. Embedding numbers and proof points and that are really sticky and eye-catching within a larger narrative that builds up a new idea is very effective, but just piling on the numbers doesn't help. Finally, last thing not to try, just leaving people where they are with their existing mental models doesn't work. So people's causal models, the models that they have that are about how something happens and how it plays out and why it works that way, those are the ones to pay most attention to. The little joke here is, the person saying, why don't the greenhouse gases escape through the hole in the ozone layer? We have actually seen people make arguments like that, right? The model of the ozone layer having a hole in it, and that's how the sunlight gets in, and this is what is causing global warming. That's a present and real model. Without a sense of the mechanism by which climate change is happening, just as an example, people have really high levels of commitment to the issue. We want to tackle climate change, but without the right model, that this is about the buildup of heat-trapping gases in our atmosphere, and so therefore the fix is to stop emitting those heat-trapping gases. Without that causal model in place, they tend to reason their way to ineffective or mismatched policies, even though they care about the issue. So in our interviews with the public, the number one solution we hear to climate change, people want a solution, but they recommend recycling. I'm all for recycling. We should keep doing it. It's helpful for the ocean and other living beings, but it is not a really well matched solution to climate change. So just leaving people's causal pathway empty, right, really doesn't work. So final slide here. What we have seen works quite well is that instead of trying to rebut people's misunderstandings, the way to shift mental models is to shift people's attention to a more productive mental model, a more accurate, fuller, conceptually robust way of understanding the issue. So redirecting their attention to what is true and how it does work is the most effective way to shift mindsets or mental models on an issue. So techniques for redirecting attention, I would sum them up in terms of really helping people build up a concept as explanation. We see explanation as the most effective way to build new mental models. So that can be done through explanatory chains. This leads to that, which leads to that. Help just really unpacking step by step. Examples that help people think about how something works and not just saying, you know, we tried it in this city and it was awesome, but really telling a story of how, what happened, what flowed from one thing to the other. And then explanatory metaphors, carefully choosing a metaphor that gives people a more apt comparison, recruit in what they know about blankets or toasters or cars or gardens, and they can think about those things, they can reason with those things. You're basically pulling in the mental models of that other comparison and using that to think through an issue. So this is part of the research that we do at Frameworks to help find the most effective explanatory techniques on different social issues. And again, that work is published and you can look at it, but otherwise just if we haven't researched that or you're just working on something your own, really focusing on explanation to build up a new concept to reason from, we see as the overarching good technique for that. So those are just a few thoughts on how to think about thinking. And I'll pause there and turn it back over to Hayling.
Great. Thank you, Julie. Really helpful to get some more of the foundation there. I like that, thinking about thinking. So we're going to bookend some of that foundational background with more stories of practice. So we have Tammy and Rick from the Hogg Foundation who are going to share more about how their team have been approaching mental models in the context of their mental health work. So we'll pass it along to the Hogg team.
Okay, thank you. So the Hogg Foundation was established in 1940, so we have 79 years of history. We're like a lot of foundations. Historically, we funded lots of programs, services, lots of research, what I refer to often as downstream approaches. Until probably the last couple of decades, mental health has typically been focused on diagnosis, treatment, medications, with the endpoint of symptom reduction or symptom management. The past decade or so at the foundation, we've been very thoughtful and intentional about focusing on some key informative, exciting, innovative areas such as integrated health, recovery, peer support, faith-based mental health. And a couple of years ago, FSG, our friends at FSG guided us through a strategic planning process and really helped us really define kind of moving our work upstream, which what I mean by that is supporting well-being in communities where mental health is still essential to overall health. And although we thought, wow, what a big undertaking, because, you know, like our world has always been around focusing on mental health and downstream. But when we look back at our portfolio and my colleague Tammy, her work the past decade, leading what we refer to as the East Texas Coalition for Mental Health Recovery, that was a real significant building block in shifting the mindsets of people with mental health conditions, the communities, and all of that with the goal of system change. We heard some excellent examples about mindsets and about stigma. And of course, you know, mental health, I often refer to it as kind of the unwanted redheaded stepchild. And I say that because my colleague is redheaded. But I think that really illustrates that, you know, mental health has always been compartmentalized. Nobody wanted to talk about it. And so you fast forward to today, lots of conversation around it and a recognition that mental health is essential to overall health. And so as we thought about this, you know, we couldn't help but look back and at the decade of work that Tammy has led to really give some concrete examples about what that looked like and how that worked, and then try to bridge that to today, where we're about a year into our communities and supporting well-being in rural communities. So I'll go ahead and transition over to Tammy.
Thank you, Rick. And yes, I am the redheaded stepchild. I'll go with that. My mom used to say that too, so that's pretty funny. Yes.
Julie, I think we lost your audio. We could hear you with Rick's audio.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Sorry about that. So you missed all of the brilliant things that I said. Now I'm going to forget them.
No, it was just 10 seconds. You're good.
Oh, okay. Well, then I can't pretend. Okay. So here at the foundation, we really did want to shift some mental models. And one that I wanted to share with you in particular that I think most people are familiar with is the idea of the disease model, the medical model of mental health, behavioral health. And that has been around for decades. Some might even say hundreds of years. And actually in the 70s, that started to shift a little bit. People started to think about, was it actually chronic for everyone? Was it actually something that people could get better from? And the language started to shift a little bit. And one of the things that I want people to understand is that shifting a mental model is not a quick process. It is absolutely something that takes a long time, and it takes a commitment to looking pretty far down the road in terms of how you want to see things change and what do you need to do to get there. And so, I would love to say that 40 years ago, people had the foresight to say, well, we need to do these things in order to get to this place in 40 years. I don't really think that's the case. I think in general, things have played out this way. But I do think that in the last 2 decades, there have been some very intentional things done to shift the thinking, particularly around mental health. And so one that I wanted to share with you, two actually that I want to share with you in particular are around peer support and recovery. So there's this idea that people with lived experience of having mental health conditions, back in the 70s, even hearing their voices was something fairly new, and thinking that there was value to hearing their voices was a new concept for people. And so that was a big shift even back then. It became a really interesting idea as more and more people with mental health conditions started to talk amongst each other. They also started to recognize that that was a valuable treatment modality to actually have that support from their peers. And so that's where peer support came from. That changed the workforce of mental health. I mean, over the last 2 decades, we've seen a huge shift in the number of people who are peer providers becoming part of a treatment team, becoming part of helping people that are in the public mental health system receive services, and the outcomes from that have been really great. So that's a very large shift that has made a big impact. The second one is really thinking about recovery as a modality. The idea that people can and do recover. I like to say that the expectation is now that people recover from mental illness, and that it's not this expectation of only symptom control. And when that has shifted, people start to change the way they think about how they're going to treat the symptoms that someone has. And the person themselves gets to decide which symptoms are really the ones that need to be treated, because sometimes what I think needs to be treated is not necessarily what my neighbor thinks or what my family thinks, that kind of thing. So those mindsets were very ingrained. This idea of a medical model, this idea of only professional providers could provide treatment and support, shifting that to peer support and shifting that to a recovery paradigm has been huge. And the foundation, about a decade ago, decided that one of the ways they wanted to work on that was to bring consumers and family members, bring their voices into the work that they were doing. And so my colleague Stephanie Bryan and I got lucky enough that we were going to be the 2 people that they chose to do that. And we still feel that way. We still feel very blessed to be in these positions. We've gotten to speak on behalf of our peers, but also to speak for ourselves and our own experiences, and really change the work of the foundation to look at advancing recovery and wellness in Texas. Over the last couple of years, as Rick mentioned, we went through a pretty intensive strategic planning process with FSG, And we decided really to back up and broaden our thinking. We had worked really hard around inclusion of historically excluded voices like those of mental health consumers. That was very much a focus for us for that period of a decade. And we recognized that we wanted to bring that to a broader group of people. We wanted to look at historically excluded groups of people in general, and how do we get everyone involved in creating environments that are conducive to well-being. So I'm going to pause for a minute and ask Rick to share with you a little bit about the work that we've been doing most recently. And he and I have been partnering on that, and it's been quite a learning experience. So Rick, if you'll share with them a little bit of that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so as Tammy mentioned, now we're moving towards really looking at this inclusive process where we provide support and platform and funding to communities and provide them the opportunity to define those community conditions. A big piece of this is, again, Tammy mentioned this, is really the outreach and engagement to bring those often unheard voices to the table, make them part of the process. And that way, the process is where, you know, people come together, define those conditions that contribute to health inequities, disparities, et cetera, and really develop a plan. And they'll submit that plan to us, and we'll, as long as they went through that level of rigorous process, you know, we're going to sign off on it. So it's really a different way of from a grant maker standpoint. Typically, grant makers are thinking about, you know, funding certain kinds of things, you know, evidence-based practice or a certain model or certain approach, and we're allowing communities to define what they want to do, and we believe that communities are the experts. And so I think, you know, what we've learned over the last decade and the work that, you know, we've done through recovery and peer support and some of these other innovations has really taught us a lot about, you know, again, shifting those mindsets and those mental models, so that way people start to understand that mental health is really a bigger piece of overall health, and that people can and do recover. And we have living examples day in, day out of people in recovery and the contributions they make. And so it's still, as Tammy mentioned, you know, it's taken, you know, decades for the mental health field to kind of move along that pathway, and we still see a lot of work to be done. But I think, you know, we've made a contribution, and there's some great examples all around the country of organizations doing similar types of work. So we're just proud to be able to make a contribution. And I will end there and
Excellent.
go over.
Okay, can I just nerd out about some of the awesome things that these folks just shared? I cannot restrain myself from talking about mental models. So I love a couple things that I think I just want to lift up for the audience to really take away from this. One is the crispness with which both of these organizations have articulated the mental models that are keeping thinking stuck on their issue. So that's really, really important. There are multiple models on any issue. So folks at the Hogg Foundation mentioned a couple, that mental health equals mental illness. That's one thing. People conflate them. That's one. The idea that you know, it's genetics and therefore it's set in stone and it is what it is. It can't be changed, right? That fatalistic mental model, the individualism mental model, but it's all about that person's kind of willpower and not about the kind of support they get. So they've really got a sense of which ones they are, and have thought about them being durable, and therefore you need a long-term strategy for change. So understanding that what you're up against, naming it explicitly, understanding that they are by their nature durable, and therefore you need a durable strategy for changing them. That's really, really effective practice. And what I heard from Daryl was a really thoughtful, tactical way of getting at folks in a way that they can hear, and a medium that they can hear, with a messenger that they can hear, in order to build up a new mental model. So probably, you know, I would think that we would see a couple models on the issue of voter behavior and how Americans think about that. So one is that civic engagement equals voting, and so once you vote it, check, you've done your job. But what Daryl's strategy, PushBlack strategy, is doing is building on that, not rebutting it, but building it up to say, well, actually, it's not just that private act, right? It's this other thing. It includes talking to other voters and bringing them in, and talk is part of civic engagement too. So it's a really effective way to think about what is it that we need people to know and understand, and then adding that. Sorry, thank you for letting me nerd out there for a second.
Awesome. Thank you, Julie. If we can have all the panelists return to the video chat, we'd love to open things up for the broader group and entertain a few questions from the audience. So yeah, let's plug back in. And I'll share a few that are coming in since we want to spend a little bit of time with thoughts that have come up for folks during the call. So for starters, and maybe we can pose it to the broader groups. Let's say whoever feels best positioned to jump in, go for it. Are mental models relative depending upon the issue, or do we feel like we've experienced folks operating with kind of one predominant mental model that they apply to different contexts? How do you see that playing out in the field?
I think the examples the panel just gave shows that there are what anthropologists would take for granted, which is that there are multiple mental models on any issue. Which one is going to be operating at any given time is context dependent. So you can either call up a really unproductive mental model like fatalism by shouting the sky is falling on your issue, right? Making it seem like a really big problem. Or you can call up a receptive one that's in there but maybe not so quick to get to the front of the line of thinking, that we can solve the problems ahead of us, before us, if we come together in a collective action. And which one is operating is going to be dependent on your communication.
Can I
Any
throw
other thoughts on that,
something
Steve?
in?
Yeah, go for it, Tammy.
One of the things that I was thinking when you were asking that question is, it's always been interesting to me that the medical model can coexist with the recovery model. Those two things are not mutually exclusive, and yet there's a lot of controversy on that because people kind of want to go toward one or the other. And so I think the question is interesting because I think it depends on how you're approaching the problem, and then determines how you're responding to it. So, I feel like a lot of times it's just a broadening of a mental model. It doesn't necessarily have to be completely, I'm not sure how else to say that, but.
Sure. There's a follow-up question that I think is related from a different member of the audience. So this is, I think, maybe something that you've encountered in the work as you just engage with different players in your system. So as part of strategic planning or maybe diagnosis, how do you go about identifying what mental model is existing? So is there a process that you undertake to really kind of gauge what you're up against or what you might be working with?
Hayling, so from the PushBlack end of things, we're constantly testing out new mental models. So for any given story, we're trying to figure out what's the best way to deliver this story. One of our most top performing articles is around the power of okra. And so okra, we're able to talk about the history of this West African vegetable and bring it all the way to the forefront of how it's a popular thing in this country, in America, North America, but also say, hey, this isn't just like a cool new vegetable. There are all these other stories that Black people can contribute to it. So we just see our role as making sure that people understand that we've had our hands in a lot of things and that the mainstream narrative would have you believe that we haven't. So for us, we kind of look towards Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey says that a people with no knowledge of their history is like a tree without roots. And so for us, we won't stop until our tree bears fruit. And so we're constantly trying to bear this fruit through each story that we send out.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that example.
And that the power of metaphor, right, on display right there.
Yeah.
I would say that, so one is that diagnosing, right, naming and precisely analyzing the mental models in play on a social issue is one of the services we provide as a nonprofit to other nonprofits. So one thing you can always do is just download a report and look at it. It's another thing that I have found to be really effective in the meeting is asking people who have worked on a social issue for a long time, what are things you have heard time and time again that are just crazy making that you wish you would never hear again? And with a 15-minute discussion of anybody who's been working on a social issue, you will get a pretty good diagnosis of the mental models that are obscuring an issue. And then you want to find the productive mental models, which are the ones that are really kind of helpful in understanding issues. So Daryl, you just pointed to a mental model that is about continuity of history across the African diaspora, right? That's a really, that we are connected, right, across history. That's a really productive mental model for the type of work you're trying to do. And so the question that you can ask that can get people at that sort of thing are, what are some of the metaphors? What are some of the sayings? What are some of the most beautiful things you've ever heard expressed, right, on your issue? And again, 15, 20 minutes, a good meeting with people who have been working on the issue will generate a lot of those positive mental models. Labeling those, both the negative and the positive, understanding what they do is really helpful. If you know there aren't going to be that many. The anthropologists are going to kill me for giving a number here, but based on our own studies, there's like 20 or 30 models on any issue. It's not infinite. It's a lot, but it's finite. And if you can predict what they are, you can prepare for them, and you can have that long-term strategy for how your communications are going to avoid reinforcing the unproductive ones and building up those ones that are really helpful to your cause.
That's great. Thank you. So we're coming up on the hour. We have a few minutes left, so maybe I'll pose one question and ask that our panelists maybe reply in kind of rapid fire form. And it's a question kind of about the how. So we heard from frameworks that there are a lot of effective and proven strategies for shifting mental models, but those seem to be especially salient for emotion neutral types of issues. So how might we approach emotionally charged issues? I think if we're talking about stigmas around mental health or issues affecting people of color, particularly Black folks in this country, we're entering a fraught conversation. So how have you experienced success approaching maybe hot button issues where you might encounter some models that are in conflict?
Wow, that's a great question. I'm just reminded that our premise has always been to meet people where they're at. And in order to do that, you really need to do, for lack of a better word, listening sessions, but to really listen to what people have to say, listen to what communities have to say. And then just, hit on a couple of Julie's remarks about, then you'll have a better sense of what is the predominant mindset and what may be driving that. And in order to do that, you really need to just kind of walk in and be a listener, be a participant, try to engage people, and really learn and understand where they're coming from. Again, as we've all talked about, this is long-term work, but I think that's the thing that just comes to mind when that question kind of raised, and that would be my advice or suggestion to anyone going into this type of work.
Thank you.
I'll jump in on that with you, Rick. I think starting where people are is extremely important. And the piece that I would add to that is being very clear about where you want to be and where you want to go. Because I think getting from that one place to the second place is not necessarily an easy process. And so being able to keep in mind, I keep thinking of just the very basic, I think with what PushBlack is doing, but also with work that we're doing, is around valuing human beings and valuing people's voices and the contributions that people have. And so if that's really where we're trying to get, as long as we keep that in the center of everything that we're doing, then I think we can work towards shifting in that direction. So
thank you. Daryl, anything to add?
Sure. From the PushBlack side, I think we kind of take a page out of Malcolm X's book where we just try to make it plain. We do a lot of message testing, but we try not to over glamorize things or use too many fancy words. We try to just say what it is that's going on. That's especially important when it's coming to controversial situations where mainstream media will have you believe all kinds of lies and false narratives when it comes to Black folks. And so we're trying to compete with that by just saying what it is and not getting caught up in lots of vocabulary.
Thank you. Julie, closing thoughts?
Well, I would just amplify and piggyback on something that Daryl said, which is that people are more polarized on the news than they tend to be in reality. And so assuming that every conversation you're going into is MSNBC versus Fox is a sure way to kind of is to create polarization, right? And so to the extent that you can remove any cues that put people in a my team versus their team, that us versus them type of space, you can use an explanatory approach that calls people in instead of calling them out. You actually have fewer hyper emotionally charged issues. And so I think that those explanatory techniques are especially important on issues where we have had that polarizing rhetoric thrown at us by the media and other actors.
Sounds like another endorsement for making it plain. I like Brother Malcolm's wisdom on that one.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. So to close up, we're going to pass it back to Jennifer, who will wind down the discussion.
Well, thank you all, and I want to thank everyone who joined us today, our presenters and all of those participants. I know we had so many questions that we weren't able to get to, but we hope to find a way to continue the conversation with our esteemed panelists. So with that, we want to just wish everyone a great day. If you are interested in continuing additional conversations on system change and other topics with the Collective Impact Forum, you can join us just on your screen you have here in October in Pittsburgh. We have an event where we will be exploring many of these topics and more. And we've got several folks asking, yes, we did record this session and we'll be sending out a link. So if you'd like to share this with your colleagues at a later time, you can absolutely do so. And our final request of you is to please take a survey that we will be sending you to help us. We're always looking to improve what we bring to you all, and that'll give us some really useful feedback. So with that, thank you very much and have a great day.
Okay. Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Well.